report.
Tonight, Alan Jones accused of abusing his power to indecently assault young men. Also tonight, White Team Minchin started off sounding brave in defending Jews, but ended up looking like a coward. And don't miss this, with this uproar about police dropping an investigation into 2 radical Muslim preachers in Sydney, an expert on the Quran explains what police can't understand, the source of the hate preached by imams here and repeated by young extremists everywhere.
I hate you for the sake of Allah. Every Christian, I hate you all for the sake of Allah.
But first, and before I get on to stunning developments today in the Britney Higgins case, I tell you what, developments that make the millions that this Labor government gave her stink to high heaven. I should announce that last night's show has had a win. Last night I broke the news that Australia Post had cut off all mail deliveries to and from Israel. I thought it was outrageous. Australia Post said it was, too dangerous and not enough planes. But I said last night, other senders like DHL, they were still sending mail to Israel. But today, Australia Post has reversed that decision. The mail will now go through to Israel. But now to an absolute scandal, to that payout that the grateful Albanese government gave to Britney Higgins in a compensation deal that, to me, now looks corrupt. Higgins, 2 days ago, finally revealed in court on oath how much the government had paid her, an extraordinary $2.3 million. But she was wrong again. The court, late this afternoon, released a secret settlement the government made with Higgins. It actually paid her even more, $2.45 million. This includes $400,000 for hurt, distress and humiliation, $100,000 for domestic assistance. But what we still don't know is why. Because the more Higgins speaks, the more this mega payout smells. Higgins has now finished giving 3 days of evidence in court trying to prove that she was indeed raped by her colleague then, Bruce Lehrmann, after a drunken night out in the Parliament and then in the Parliament House office of the Defence Minister, Linda Reynolds. Now, Associates trying to prove this because Lehrmann denies it and Higgins' story of what actually happened keeps changing. She's actually admitted in this court hearing to telling lies and getting details wrong. For instance, she lied to police and friends about going to a doctor after the rape. She falsely claimed she'd had a 3-hour panic attack. She claimed she was fall down drunk that night when CCTV footage shows her apparently steady on her feet. Yet the Albanese government last year agreed, after just 1 day of mediation, to give Britney Higgins nearly $2.5 million to compensate her for the supposedly terrible treatment she got from the Morrison Liberal government after allegedly saying she was raped. Now, I've got to ask, was this in fact an act of gratitude by Labor for a woman whose allegations helped it to destroy that Morrison government? And Labor sure had a lot of reason to thank Higgins. Her boyfriend had fed ammunition to Labor frontbencher Katie Gallagher to help smear Prime Minister Scott Morrison as unsympathetic, anti-women. Labor leader Anthony Albanese weighed in too.
I say to the Prime Minister, listen to it. Listen to what Britney Higgins had to say. Britney Higgins and her extraordinary speech today that just reinforced to me the courage in order to come forward.
Now, the suspicion grows that this was a political thank you, or maybe Labor had to act like this rape really did happen. It suited it more, because none of Higgins' main claims in getting this payout have been proven. None. Now, first you got to ask, was there even a rape? Even Higgins this week admitted she didn't think she could convince the criminal court she was indeed raped beyond reasonable doubt. Second, what about the key part of Higgins' claim for compensation, that her Liberal bosses supposedly treated her badly when she told them she was raped? Again, none of that has been proved, and in fact is denied. Higgins' immediate boss at the time, Linda Reynolds, she denies Higgins even told her she was raped at first and denies treating her badly when she was told.
I was the perfect villain, although none of it, this is the irony of it, none of it was absolutely true.
And Reynolds has since had to sell a Canberra home to raise the money for legal battles to clear her reputation here. Now, Higgins' next boss, then Attorney General Michaelia Cash, also denies being told of the rape, and it was even secretly recorded by Higgins giving her support, with no sign that Cash actually knew of any rape. So again, there was plenty of reason to at least question Higgins' story. Yet, the Albanese government last year banned Reynolds, banned Cash from coming to the mediation over Higgins' payout and challenging her story. In fact, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus had lawyers write to the lawyers for Reynolds and Cash, saying the Commonwealth requires that your client does not attend the mediation and that they do not seek to do so, and that they do not make any public comment about the mediation or the civil claims made by Higgins. Shut up. In fact, Dreyfus even threatened to strip Reynolds and Cash from protection of any legal costs they might incur if they did try to go to that meeting. And by the way, the confidential settlement that's now been revealed in court this afternoon shows another falsehood from Higgins. She told the court the government admitted liability in this case, that it was guilty. You look at the document, absolutely no, it did not. Finally, what about the third element to Higgins' claim for this payout? The Liberals treated her so badly, they left her almost, well, she might not be employable for 40 years. Again, that's also questionable. Higgins has in fact since worked in unpaid jobs and got a $108,000 advance to write a book about her alleged rape. She's even posed in front of the United Nations in Switzerland and announced, well, the UN had given her a job as an intern. What's more, text messages uncovered by the Daily Mail even show that a friend of Victoria's First People's Assembly telling Higgins she could work there as a media advisor, apparently after her friend told her bosses that Higgins had Aboriginal ancestry, even though Higgins said she wasn't actually sure which tribe was hers. Higgins got the job, and she's got this cash. And the question now is, why? Joining me is Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash. Thank you so much for joining me. The compensation deal between the Albanese government and Britney Higgins, it's now been released. She was actually paid more than she told the court, $2.45 million of taxpayers' money. That's because apparently you treated her very badly, Linda Reynolds treated her very badly, you both deny it, after a rape that hasn't even been proved. Does this deal stink to you?
Well, it's for the Attorney-General of Australia and the Prime Minister to answer any questions in relation to the settlement. What I will say, though, Andrew, is I gave evidence in the ACT Supreme Court and I stand by that evidence. There is, however, an ongoing defamation trial, so on that basis, I won't provide any further comment.
I won't comment then on the actual details, but I've got to ask you this. The Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, he ordered Linda Reynolds, both of you, not to give evidence in the one-day mediation session with Britney Higgins' lawyers that worked out this deal last year, $2.45 million. You would have gone there, you would have denied Higgins' claims against you, you were warned off. Were you surprised by this ban?
Well, again, as I said, I have given evidence in the ACT Supreme Court and I stand by that. And yes, I think both Senator Reynolds and I are on the record as saying it is very disappointing and perhaps even a little surprising that we were not asked to provide evidence.
Now, today, more embarrassment for the Albanese government. Now, a fifth one of the foreign criminals in immigration detention
Andrew.
Released without proper controls, arrested. I mean, but Kaylee,
seriously, Andrew, you wake up at the moment. Correct.
I know.
It's just unbelievable.
People
Every day you wake up and there's another detainee. That's exactly right. It's a train wreck that keeps on actually gathering carriages as we go along. But I think, you know, what is so devastating in this whole situation is the government was not prepared, Andrew. For goodness sakes, in June of this year, they had a very, very clear indication the High Court was going to go this way. Why didn't they prepare, have the legislation ready to go? So on day one, bang, they could have done something. But instead, what do? And I think Chris Merritt, he said it today, they literally jumped. It was a knee-jerk reaction. They want you to believe they had to let all of these people out. As you and I know, the High Court initial orders applied to one person. The principles that needed to then be applied to the cohort, well, no one knew what those principles were for the next 3 weeks. So quite frankly, it doesn't matter what Mr Dreyfus says. It doesn't matter what the Prime Minister says. They jumped early, and the people now paying this price are the Australian people, and in particular, those Australians who have now had crimes committed against them, allegedly.
Well, Chris Merritt luckily put viewers here ahead of the game because he made that argument here first on the show. But the thing here is, yes, I agree with you. I've been saying this all along. They should have prepared. They knew in June this was probably going to come. They should have prepared. But what makes this 5th arrest even funnier, well, more unforgivable, is that the guy, he didn't need new laws. This guy had an outstanding warrant for his arrest. The government had not checked that before letting him go too as well.
And but Andrew, that is an incredibly important issue you just raised. And what it shows is the Albanese government did not undertake the appropriate checks. Knee-jerk reaction, rush to get people out, prepared to compromise the safety and security of Australians, because this was an outstanding warrant from 2012. Seriously, if you had bothered to pick up the phone to the relevant state police, if you had bothered to do a quick check on this person's history, guess what? You wouldn't have released them. What this says to the Australian people is, this is a total, complete and utter disaster, but it lies squarely at the foot of Mr Albanese, the Attorney-General, Minister Giles and Minister O'Neill. A mess because of this government's failures.
Now, the government says, well, look, we moved to fix it. The Prime Minister said today, we've been focused on fixing it. They've got a new law now that to get the dangerous ones among the 148 that are let go, to get them behind bars, they've got to have served at least 7 years jail sentence. It's got to be a threat to the community, etc. Now, it won't actually say, yesterday, that farcical press conference, the Immigration Minister would not say how many of those 148 he was going to try to get locked up by going to a judge and saying they're a menace. Wouldn't say how many. Have you got any idea how many people this new law will apply to?
No, and this is the problem, Andrew. Again, how does a government release 147 criminals who have no right to be in this country into the Australian community without even understanding what their history is? I mean, you've got to be kidding me. This is a government, Andrew, that, do you remember Mr Albanese before the election? He trumpeted transparency. Well, seriously, what has happened to that transparency? Because this government now hides everything from the Australian people. And don't you love it, Andrew, when they say, oh, the privacy of these individuals involved? Andrew, guess what? I'm more worried about the safety and security of Australians. Peter Dutton, the Coalition, we will put the safety and security of Australians first every single step of the way. And quite frankly, shame on Mr Albanese. I tell you, Andrew, would you take Mr Albanese and the Australian Labor Party into battle with you? Because I wouldn't.
Michaelia Cash, good to talk to you.
Great to be with you as always.
Now, this is an important discussion because I don't think our authorities, politicians or police, journalists for that matter, know what we're up against or want to admit it. I'm talking about hate like this from a Muslim man.
Any Jew, any Christian, I hate you all for the sake of Allah.
He hates me for the sake of Allah.
You hate these bastards and the other bastards.
Would you kill me if you get a chance?
If we're at war, I will chop your head off.
Just some random crazy extremists, one bad apple we're told, but then there's this poll of Palestinians last month showing 75% actually backed the Hamas attack in Israel on October 7, where they slaughtered 1,200 Jews. They beheaded people, tortured, shot dead children, mass rapes. And again, the excuses, well, that's just because the Israelis, the Jews, push Palestinians too far. Now, this came to a head for me today when I read that New South Wales and federal police are dropping their investigations into some jihad preaching and Jew-hating sermons by two New South Wales Muslim clerics, sermons posted online. Like this one, praising the black flag of jihad and calling for jihad and martyrdom.
The flag that they talk about that belongs and a symbol for ISIS and Tanzim al-Qaeda. This is the flag of the Muslims. The national flag is not our flag. Raise up the flag of La ilaha illallah so you die as a martyr. The jihad is the solution.
Now, the police say this lecture, revealed first on this show, didn't break the law. Nor did this Jew hatred, where one of the preachers actually quoted a sacred Muslim text.
To the invading Jews we say, by Allah, the day you will be kicked out of Palestine is coming. A day when the stones and the trees will speak and say, "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him."
Joining me is Mark Dury. He's an Anglican pastor who holds doctorates in linguistics and Quranic theology. He's an academic. He's written a superb history of the writing of the Quran. It's called The Quran and its Biblical Reflexes. Mark Dury, thank you so much for coming on the show. These examples I've given of hatred of Jews, support for the Hamas murder of Jews, a preacher likening Jews to apes and swine, saying the day would come when they had to be killed. Are these the minority views of a few misfits, or just something a bit more serious than that?
I wouldn't call it a minority, these minority views of misfits. They're widely held, certainly not by all Muslims. Part of the problem is, for example, that tradition about the day will come when Jews will hide behind trees and the trees will say, kill them. That is actually the words of Muhammad. There's something, it's a tradition, a prophecy that he spoke about the future. One of the, I think the big challenges is that the way the Muslim community is responding to these issues has been deeply influenced by Islam itself. It's the Quran that says it repeatedly to Muslims not to make friends with unbelievers unless they have to for their own safety. So that man in London who was saying, I hate you, he was speaking a religious truth that he'd been taught in his religious formation. And that accounts, I think, also for the global nature of the response that we've been seeing to what's happening in Israel with the pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian marches and the sort of sentiments that are coming out.
So when you see, like among Palestinians, a pretty well-regarded poll saying 75% supported the Hamas attack on October 7, which involved scenes of utter barbarity, beheadings, rapes, tortures, all that kind of stuff. And when you see not a single Muslim organisation in Australia condemning it, is that just because, well, they just see it as a battle in a war, or is there something that, I mean, it seems to me inconceivable that Christians wouldn't denounce it if it had been done in the name of Christianity, but it's not being denounced when it's done by an Islamist terror group.
Yeah, it's actually quite striking that the Islamic leaders in Australia, immediately after October the 7th, politicians on both sides came out to express sympathy and compassion for the victims. And the Islamic community's response was, you mustn't do that. You should only do that if you're expressing concern for Palestinians. They wanted an equal, an even-handed approach. But in fact, their own response has been completely one-sided. So that was not it was a very inconsistent response on their part. I think that the problem here is that there is a view that's deeply embedded, I think, in Islamic fundamental texts that the real victims are Muslims. And that worldview that non-Islamic victimhood is almost a threat, it's a competitive victimhood that can't be acknowledged and has to be downplayed, is kicking in for the people in Gaza. Unfortunately, in some ways, the war heightens their animosity. You know, before October the 7th, the Gazans in general in a poll were opposed to Hamas, and only 20% favoured a defeat Israel outcome for their crisis. But the effect of the conflict has been to cause this kind of aversion to non-Muslim victimhood, a preference for Muslim victimhood to rise to the surface. And that's why there's so little compassion being expressed for absolutely atrocious, barbarous crimes that were committed against innocent Israelis.
Well, look, I'm just wondering how much of that is like, you know, the natural thing, my country or my people, right or wrong, in time of war. I mean, it's quite a human kind of response, I guess. But how much of it comes down to the teachings of Islam? Now, I'll give you an example. The New South Wales Police Force now, with these preachers calling for jihad, these preachers calling, preaching Jew hatred. It seems to me they're actually following Muslim scripture here, and the dilemma for the police would be, if you arrest them for that, then where do you stop?
I think that's a weakness in our policing and the way the government's policy has developed. They've actually exposed the police to many years of sensitivity training towards the Muslim community. So there's a background that's quite deep here. Interestingly, in the UK, Islamic preachers have been convicted for quoting that hadith, that tradition of Muhammad about Jews being killed in the end times. It is very disappointing that all these much kind of fated anti-incitement laws that have been brought in are unable to be used. I think one of the real problems we face is that it's not enough to just intervene if there's an actual plan to harm somebody, an actual terrorist plot. The problem is that the ideology of contempt for the unbeliever and the exaltation of a kind of Muslim superiority creates conditions in which really unfortunate things happen, but we are unable to intervene in that situation. Regarding the deeper question, is this kind of orientation to Muslim victimhood, is it in the core text? I think it is. In the Quran, there's a verse that's repeated a few times, which says that fitna, which is persecution or trouble, trauma for Muslims, fitna is worse than killing. That is, it's worse for a Muslim to suffer than to kill, in this case, in this context, the non-Muslims. And the Quran also says, fight them until there's no more fitna. And so there's a mandate there which skews the interpretation of the significance of victimhood. It's really interesting because in the Christian tradition, the effect of the crucifixion of Christ was that it was considered to be more honourable and better to suffer unjustly than to be a persecutor, to use violence. But at the heart of the Islamic story is a response to persecution or rejection, which became violent. And so the minimization of the victimhood of non-Muslims goes hand in hand with a permission to validate the violence of groups like Hamas. And that's a civilizational challenge. It's a deeply embedded issue in Islamic jurisprudence, in Islamic thinking. And what you're seeing with those figures from Hamas is that worldview is kind of kicking in the midst of a conflict. It's a tragedy, I think, of enormous proportions.
Well, just finally, Mark Dury, you mentioned the life of Christ, how that he'd rather be crucified than fight back. The worst thing he did was overthrow some tables. Is the problem, you mentioned that most Muslims would not be out there saying jihad, jihad. It's absolutely true, even if there's a silence there. But is the tension for them the fact that the Islamic faith does not have a Christ-like figure who'd rather die than kill, but it's based on the sayings of a guy, Muhammad, who certainly did kill, in fact, wiped out a Jewish tribe, among other things. Is that the real tension here?
I think there's a fundamental difference in the way in which Jesus responded to persecution and the way in which Muhammad responded to persecution. Jesus' response led to his death and was considered by Christians to be a victory. in the Islamic frame, the victory was Muhammad's defeat of those that had opposed him. And that's just a fundamental difference. I've been reading Tom Holland's book, Dominion, which describes the impact of Christianity on the ancient world. And in the time of the Roman Empire, it was considered of no particular concern at all that hundreds of thousands or even 1 million of your opponents could be slaughtered. Julius Caesar slaughtered, according to accounts, 1 million Gauls, and this was considered to be absolutely fine. And what changed that was the influence of Christianity, that it was considered to be honourable to be vulnerable. It was considered to be a good thing to be righteous, but yet hurt, you know. And that means that Christians respond to experience of persecution potentially very differently. And it's foundational. Actually, I think the valuing of minorities and of vulnerable people comes out of that Christian tradition in the Western tradition. Whereas in the Islamic tradition, non-Muslim groups have been kept in a subjugated state and not considered to be inferior and rejected. So what you're seeing, I think what we're seeing is a kind of a tension, a challenge between two completely different worldviews. The problem with our society is that secularism has taken us to a place where many are religiously illiterate. We're not able to understand the spiritual drivers of who we are and our culture. And we're completely perplexed by a very different religious and spiritual worldview. And it's causing these very tragic consequences.
All the more reason with Christmas coming up, Mark Jury, for a lot of people to contemplate that and to think, hello, these values we have did not come from out of the clear blue sky. We did not think them up for ourselves. It's a heritage that we throw away at grave peril to ourselves. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.
After the break, Barnaby Joyce on this Britney Higgins case and that fishy payout. And a new poll, 2/3 of Australians no longer believe a key promise of the Albanese government. Joining me for his regular Thursday spot is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, great to see you again. Look, I talked to earlier about this very smelly deal the Albanese government signed off on last year to pay $2.45 million, nearly $2.5 million in compensation for unproven bad treatment by the Morrison Liberal government after an unproven rape. To me, it looked like an act of gratitude by Labor, or maybe just really wanted to act like this rape really was true because they could use it as a weapon against the Liberals. Your thoughts about all this?
Oh, Andrew, that can't be true, mate. That can't be true. That's outrageous, Andrew. Your thoughts that someone would get paid $2.45 million, which is the equivalent of, if you lose a mum or dad, serving mum or dad, that's you get about $104,000 payout. So that's the equivalent of 23 or people who've lost a mum or a dad in a war. It's the equivalent of well over about 113 years of losing a limb in a war. But what you're suggesting, Andrew, is that there was an ulterior motive between the $2.45 million payout. Because remember, Britney Higgins herself said it wasn't about the rape, it was about a lack of duty of care. That's a lot of money to get for that. And then the government itself said it wasn't even for that. It wasn't even for that. It was just to dismiss all further claims. Now, the proposition you put forward, Andrew, is outrageous.
Unworthy of me. Unworthy of me. And yet, Barnaby, maybe I've just got too old and too cynical about this because this stinks to high heaven. And I hope the Anti-Corruption Commission that Labor set up makes this a first order of business.
Absolutely. This is like every person on Civvy Street, whether you sit next to them on a plane, train or automobile, has a very clear understanding about what this is about. And it's not what's been expressed down here. I think people are pretty clear-minded about how, like, you take someone, I was talking to one guy who's working in the Pilbara, driving trains out there, and he said, like, this is outrageous. He said it sounded to him like hush money. And I've talked to another guy going up the escalator. He said virtually the same thing. And I said to them, that's outrageous. That can't be the case. Not at all.
I'm
It's
glad
not
you
hush
did that,
money.
Barnaby. You've got to stand up.
I stood up.
You've got to
for the
stand up.
government.
We can't have
absolutely.
these allegations flying around there. This is unworthy of us both. There you go. I tell you what, this needs investigation. Barnaby, I know we've talked so much this year about the global warming madness around. Well, now Chris Bowen, the Climate Change and Energy Minister, he's flown over to the massive global warming conference over in Dubai, just when there's a survey come out, Barnaby. This will shock and amaze you. It's found that 62% of Australians now think that moving to wind and solar power instead of coal means more expensive electricity. You'll fall off your chair, I'm sure. And they certainly then don't believe the government's promise that it'll cut bills by $275. But I just wonder, Barnaby, the government's gone in so far in this scare, can it actually pull out now without looking like complete geese?
Well, I'm not even going to use irony here. I mean, the whole point we have here is this government is setting up our nation for this massive, massive gut-ache, belly flop economic disaster in this crazy cultish-like pursuit of renewables. The Australian people are starting to turn around. They're starting to understand that renewables means you are poorer. My power bill, the last power bill I got, I have no air conditioner, I have no pool. I live in a 3-bedroom brick and iron house, manager's quarters, and $846 for myself and Vicky and 2 boys. Now, I can pay that. I'm very fortunate, very blessed with the money I've got. All that goes through my head is how on earth do they pay for that in South Tamworth? How on earth do they pay for that in Ipswich or Blacktown, where they probably do have an air conditioner running? Today it's hot, they'll have it running. And this is what we're doing to ourselves. And we've got the dancing, prancing Minister Bowen, prancing his way around Dubai and stitching us up even to more costs. Your power prices are going through the roof. You all know that. Your reliability is going through the floor. You all understand that. And these are overseas companies. Your money is going overseas. This is the biggest swindle of all time. The fact that foreign companies come up and say to us, because, see, we guarantee their return. We guarantee their return. So we say, for you to put in that wind factory or that solar factory and those transmission lines, what sort of return do you want? They go, if you just give me like 16, 17%, we're right. And we do it. And if they borrow the money at 4.5%, make a bid on the side of the sale of electricity when it's there, they're guaranteed. It's money for jam, money from mugs. But you're the mug because you're paying it.
Well, I tell you what, at least it's a lovely industry for some people. Chris Bowen's leading a delegation of 48 people there. That's unbelievable. Barnaby, this is my last show for the year. Thank you so much for all the help that you've given. How do you think it's panned out this year? Because it's ending with a hell of a political bang.
Andrew, I'm like, when people bring up, it's going to be a one-term government, I go, look, mate, read your history books. Scullin was the only one-term government, walked into the Depression, finished in 1932, 29 to 32, and that hasn't happened. And that was after the referendum. But I did say at the time, you've lost a lot of paint, and if you double up on this bet, you get yourself into strife. Cost of living, out of control. Referendum, complete debacle. Pedophiles, rapists, murderers, wandering the street, let out by the government, and now $2.3 million paid out to a person, and no one can really explain why.
It's 2.45. Court documents said it was more than she said.
What's $150,000 between mates? But look, this is
you can forget it. Oh, what the hell? That's that extra money, 150,000. I mean, people, you'd forget that too, Barnaby. Barnaby,
mate, you drop it on the floor. You drop it on the floor of a pub on a Friday night.
You forgot to count and you list the highlights this year that you got married. So you're in trouble, Cobber. You are in trouble. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Love it.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
After the break.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, and happy Christmas to you both. After the break, Donald Trump promises he's going to be a dictator if he's elected. Journalists are losing their minds about this, but what does it all really mean? The media left is losing its collective mind. It tried to destroy Donald Trump's now hitting the hysteria button because it seems Trump could actually become president again after next year's US election. And now it's, oh, Trump is going to be a dictator. Trump will be an even more autocratic leader next time. And Trump threatens America with authoritarian government. Trump actually joked about all this week.
Do you in any way have any plans whatsoever, if re-elected president, to abuse power, to break the law, to use the government to go after people?
You mean like they're using right now?
You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one. We're closing the border and we're drilling. After that, I'm not a dictator.
I mean, he's freaking again. Look at the headlines. Trump admitted he's going to be a dictator. I mean, are these people nuts? Meanwhile, the 4 other Republican candidates battling to be second to Trump had their 4th debate today. And this time, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis might just have beaten off former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who tried to claim he wouldn't ban transgender boys from girls' bathrooms.
He said he didn't think bathroom bills were a good use of his time. You can go look that up.
I signed a bathroom bill in Florida, so that's obviously not true.
So the idea that you would say that I was against that.
You didn't. You killed it. I signed it.
DeSantis has got some runs on the board as governor. And the favourite of the TikTok voters, Vivek Ramaswamy, the entrepreneur, made a fool of himself again.
Nikki is corrupt. This is a woman who will send your kids to die so she can buy a bigger house. This is the problem, using identity politics.
Donkey. Joining me is John Hinderaker of the Powerline blog and president of the Centre of the American Experiment. John Hinderaker, great to see you again. Thanks for coming on. This debate, I mean, to me it seems that Nikki Haley has been soaring up and up and up. I mean, she's way behind Donald Trump. But that Vivek Ramaswamy, who's sort of hit with the TikTok crowd, holding up a sign, you know, Nikki Haley's corrupt and all that. What's going on with this debate? Is this one where everyone's getting muddy in the gutter, or is this just helping Nikki Haley?
Andrew, it was a wild night. There's just 4 candidates left on the stage, and they're all pretty good. And tonight, they were going at it hard. Nikki Haley has been gaining endorsements, rising in the polls. She was a big target tonight. I thought on the whole, Ron DeSantis probably had the best night. But you're right, Ramaswamy, he just can't help himself. You know, he's a very smart guy. He's popular with young conservatives, but he goes too far. And he got booed several times tonight. He called Nikki Haley corrupt, which is over the top, insinuated that she's not intelligent. You know, he just can't quite restrain himself. But I thought it was a very interesting night. And in my view, Ron DeSantis probably had the best night. But
was there anything for Donald Trump to worry about? I mean, all the polls suggest they're so far behind that these are people just, scrabbling for the privilege of being a distant second. Is it more than that here?
Well, I think so, Andrew. I certainly hope so. I mean, Donald Trump obviously is the elephant who wasn't in the room, right? He has not been participating in these debates. He's ahead in the polls. Chris Christie is running really for the sole purpose of bashing Donald Trump. He was back at it tonight. The thing I would say about this, Andrew, is that no one has voted yet. We do not select our presidential nominees with polls. You have to actually turn out and vote, and so far nobody has done that. The first voting will be in the Iowa caucuses next month. You can't poll the Iowa caucuses. You know, it can't be done. And we'll see. You know, maybe Donald Trump walks away with it. I've got a sneaking suspicion that isn't going to happen. And if somebody else like DeSantis or Haley actually wins the Iowa caucuses, then I think it's a brand new ball game. Then I think people stop talking about the polls and start talking about the votes. And then the next primary is New Hampshire, and we'll see what happens there. So, you know, maybe Donald Trump walks away with it like he did in 2016, but then again, maybe he doesn't. And I don't think the polls are telling us all that much about how Republican primary voters are actually going to turn out.
Now, John Hinderaker, let's talk about this elephant that wasn't in the room, Donald Trump. Now, he, again, hogged the attention by doing a one-on-one with Sean Hannity and Fox News, where it drives me nuts. All these pundits, in the media left saying, "Oh, Donald Trump's a dictator. He's going to be a dictator. It's terrible." Adolf Hitler, with orange hair. And he was asked about that. I played the clip earlier and played along with it, saying, "Oh, only on day one it'll be drill, 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 but after that, no." And now again, more headlines. "Oh, he will be a dictator. He just said it." I mean, what is going on? Do you think he's going to be a dictator?
It's ironic, Andrew, because he's been the president for 4 years. If he wanted to be a dictator, we probably would have noticed it sometime during that term. And as a matter of fact, Donald Trump was the least authoritarian president we have had in recent times. He issued the fewest sweeping executive orders. He governed in a very modest way. He was the least authoritarian compared to someone like Barack Obama. You could argue Obama was actually pretty authoritarian. Donald Trump was not. And so he makes a joke like this, and of course the pundits run with it and go crazy. The president of the United States does not have dictatorial powers, okay? You can't come into office and announce that you're a dictator. It can't be done. It's not going to be done. And once again, people are just massively overreacting when Donald Trump makes a joke.
John Hinderaker, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Andrew.
Alan Jones accused of sexually assaulting several young men. Jones responds, but where should this be sorted out? Plus, singer-songwriter Tim Minchin makes a stand against the huge anti-Israel push and then runs away. More after this. Alan Jones, my former colleague, the former king of radio at Sydney's 2GB, is now in the fight of his life to save his reputation. Sydney Morning Herald has published a huge story on how Jones allegedly indecently assaulted young men. Some of those allegations, if true, are damning. One or two seem to me weak, and even though I say a try on, Jones is rich. But now a couple of things to say. I had only a little to do with him, but I have to say I am surprised and needless to say, his many enemies are already dancing on Alan's grave. Jones's lawyers now issued a statement. The allegations against Alan Jones published today are demonstrably false. In the short time available since publication, we've obtained substantial factual information which contradicts and refutes the alleged pattern of conduct by Mr. Jones. We've instructions to immediately serve a concerns notice. Defamation is the first step in the commencement of defamation proceedings. Now, I'd have to say, these allegations are so damaging that Jones has no option but to sue. But if he does sue, well, the truth is likely to come out. And for me, the courts are exactly where this should be decided. Let justice be done. But speaking of letting courts decide, not the mob, well, Tim Minchin, that reminds me of him. Minchin, the singer-songwriter, could have been a hero of this story I'm about to tell. Instead, I'm thinking coward. He's a foundation director of the Sydney Theatre Company, where some actors, of course, as you know, wore Palestinian scarves on stage and offended Jews especially. And Minchin told the Canberra audience of his own show on Monday these actors were misguided. He said some artists lived in a lefty bubble. And then he sang a Leonard Cohen song, noting it was by a Jewish man. What a guy, right? Except the audience wasn't allowed to film him. And when a journalist asked about Minchin's brave stand, the Minchin team ran for the hills. His agent wouldn't confirm what Minchin had said, even pointed out, Minchin always sings this Cohen song. And no, you can't have an interview with Tim, with brave Tim Minchin. I'm not surprised. Minchin, in my opinion, has been far too keen to run with the lefty pack himself. Remember how he abused the innocent Cardinal George Pell, falsely accused of pedophilia, and mocked the heart disease that eventually killed Pell in a song that the ABC played and played.
I mean, with all due respect, dude, I think you're scum, and I reckon you should come home, Cardinal Pell.
Joining me is Sky News presenter James McPherson of The Late Debate here on Sky at 10 p.m. and Louise Elliott, business consultant and Hobart City Councillor. James, Tim Minchin, a mensch or a mouse?
Well, firstly, with regards to the song he played about Cardinal George Pell, it was disgraceful, and it beggars belief that the ABC would put that to air. Leaving that to one side, I understand the frustration with his comments regarding Israel. We would all have liked him to have made those comments widely publicised. But before we criticise him too hard, I think we're in a situation right now where we should take the wins where we can find them. Good on him for speaking out at his concert. Okay. All right, he didn't go beyond that, but at least it's a start. And the reason, of course, that he didn't want those comments widely publicised is because as someone who's run with the left, he knows how vicious the left can be. So maybe it will be a time of reflection for him on some of his behaviour and the way he's treated people who have gone against the narrative. Maybe we might see a softening from Tim. Who knows?
Oh, James, you're a Christian getting the Christian forgiveness spirit at Christmas time far too soon for this show. I'll get stuck into him. Louise, what do you make of this? I mean, if it's going to tell, you know, what, I don't know how many people are in that room, 1,000 people of his closest fans, he'll say it to them, but won't say it outside the hall? I mean, come on.
Well, I'm actually on the kind of same page as James here. I do think it's progress. I mean, that's how sad it is. But it is progress, but it goes to show that just how vicious the other side can be. I mean, but we do need people that have, you know, aren't at risk of losing their job, being destitute, losing family. We need people who are in a position to stand up and say what they actually think, say what the truth is. Because there's so many other people that can't. I've heard from countless people, you know, who've lose their jobs for saying the truth, have people vandalism and being attacked for it. So it's disappointing that Tim didn't stand up in public because it would have been very welcome, but it's progress.
Oh, God. Honestly. James, I'm going to quote the Bible at you. Let your yes be your yes, okay? Now, in Melbourne, protesters from Extinction Rebellion once again caused traffic chaos, walking slowly backwards as cars pump more emissions into the sky, which I thought Extinction Rebellion was against. Now, James, these protests clearly don't change their minds. You'd have to be an idiot to think the motorists there are going to think, you know what, these people have a point. So what do you think they're really for?
Oh, look, Andrew, I think people are looking for meaning. They're looking for purpose. I mean, we live at one of the most prosperous times in human history, and people still looking for something to hang their hat on. As you pointed out, these protests are completely illogical. I mean, walking slowly on the road only slows traffic down, causing it to release more emissions that they say will destroy the world. So it's illogical. It's also completely ineffective. All it does is to turn the general public against the climate movement if we were ever sympathetic towards it in the first place. But it should be illegal. You shouldn't be allowed to block public infrastructure in order to make your point. Walk along the footpath slowly. Absolutely. If you want to protest, but not in the middle of the road. But then you can't bully people. This is the point. Then you can't bully people. Louise, I'm running out of time. I'm so sorry we left you short. But I was intrigued. Hobart's Lord Mayor is found to have breached the code of conduct in an interaction with you last year. Sum it up for us in 30 seconds.
Yes, so I attended a public meeting. The Lord Mayor didn't like what I said. As I left the stage, I was grabbed and verbally accosted by the female Lord Mayor, the left-leaning Lord Mayor down here. My main concern is that if that was a man, that man would have been gone within 24 hours. Instead, this has been 18 months and a caution issued.
A caution issued. I thought the left were into, you know, hugger-mugger friendly, big hugs. Oh, dearie me, it's getting a bit willing down there. Louise Elliott, James McPherson, thank you both for your work on the show this year. Love it. See you again next year, and a Merry Christmas to you both. Like I've hinted a couple of times, this is my last show for the year. It's been wonderful having you. Without you, there's no us, so thank you so much. And I want to thank to Tim and Vaz in the control rooms who press the buttons and make sure I don't, you know, disappear from the screen or don't have an orange face. And I've got to thank also my wonderful production team, Tara Moroney, Lucy Boyd, and lately Isaac Tabensky as well. And thank yous to everyone, but particularly, of course, to the viewers. and to my long-suffering wife, who's in fact probably my biggest producer, but never mind that. Have a wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you again next year. Chris Kenny's coming up. Good night.